بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلوات ربي وسلامه على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. To continue inshallah with Al-Muhadhab min Ihya Ulumuddin by Al-Imam Hujjatul Islam Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala, and we arrived at Al-Fasl Al-Thalith At-Tatawwu'u Bis-Siyam. The Imam rahimahullah ta'ala, he's going to now speak about voluntary fasting, and he says اعلم أن استحباب الصيام يتأكد في الأيام الفاضلة وفواضل الأيام بعضها يوجد في كل سنة وبعضها يوجد في كل شهر وبعضها في كل أسبوع. So the Imam rahimahullah ta'ala, he says to us, speaking to us, know that the virtue of fasting becomes more particular, i.e. more virtuous in particular virtuous days. And some of the virtuous days, you will find them spread out throughout the year. Some of them, they are spread out in every month, and some of them, they are spread out in every week, i.e. there are virtuous days throughout the year, virtuous days throughout every month, and virtuous days throughout every week. He says, أما في السنة فبعد أيام رمضان يوم عرفة ويوم أو فبعد أيام رمضان يوم عرفة ويوم عاشوراء والعشر الأول من ذي الحجة والعشر الأول من المحرم. So he says, as for throughout the year, when are the particular days that are virtuous to fast? He says, after Ramadan, meaning starting from after the month of Ramadan, the day of Arafah, the day of Ashura, and the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, and the first 10 days of Al-Muharram. And then he says, وَجَمِيعُ الْأَشْهُرِ الْحُرُمْ مَضَانُ السَّوْمِ, and every month from the months, the Al-Ashhur Al-Hurum, so the months of Al-Hurum, they are virtuous. وهي أوقات فاضلة وكان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يكثر صوم شعبان حتى كان يظن أنه في رمضان. And the Prophet ﷺ, he would increase in his fasting in the month of Sha'ban to the extent that a person would think that he is actually in the month of Ramadan. Why? Because of the amount of fasting that he would carry out in Sha'ban. وفي الخبر أفضل الصيام بعد شهر رمضان شهر الله المحرم. And the Prophet ﷺ, it's attributed to him that he said, from the best of days of fasting after the month of Ramadan is to fast the month of Al-Muharram, i.e. some of the month of Al-Muharram. And he says, وَالْأَشْهُرُ الْفَاضِلَةِ, the virtuous months are Dhul Hijjah, وَالْمُحَرَّم, وَرَجَب, وَشَعْبَان. وَالْأَشْهُرُ الْحُرُمْ ذو القعدة وذو الحجة والمحرم ورجب وأفضلها ذو الحجة لأن فيه الحج والأيام والمعلومات والمعدودات. So he says that these particular months, and just to go through it briefly, these particular months, they are special, and Dhul Hijjah is special. Why? Because of the fact that Hajj is present within that month, and al-ayam, al-ma'lumat, wal-ma'dudat are also present. And in the footnotes, Sheikh Salih Hashami, he says al-ayam al-ma'lumat hiya ayam 10 dhul hijjah. So the al-ayam al-ma'lumat that Imam al-Ghazali is referring to are the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, and al-ma'dudat, the days of At-Tashriq, so the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th days of Hajj. And so it's virtuous to fast these days for the non-muhrim. Other than Eid, of course, a person should not fast the day of Eid. And then he says, وَفِي الْخَبَرْ مَا مِنْ أَيَّامِ الْعَمَلِ فِيهِنَّ أَفْضَلُ وَأَحَبُّ إِلَى اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ مِنْ أَيَّامِ عَشَرِ ذِي الْحِجَّةِ. There is a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, there are no days and no actions more beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than the days and the actions carried out in the days of Dhul Hijjah, the first 10 days. And then he says, وَأَمَّا مَا يَتَكَرَّرُ فِي الشَّهْرِ فَأَوَّلُ الشَّهْرِ وَأَوْسَطُهُ وَآخِرُهُ وَوَسَطُهُ الْأَيَّامُ الْبِيضُ وهي الثالث عشر والرابع عشر والخامس عشر. He says, and the days which occur in every single month, firstly you have the 3 white days. So the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th, i.e., when the moon is at its fullest. So it's sunnah to fast these days, and it's virtuous to fast these days. وأما في الأسبوع فالاثنين والخميس. And as for in the week, Monday and Thursday, as is very well known. فهذه هي الأيام الفاضلة فيستحب الصيام فيها. فيها. So he says these are the virtuous days, i.e. throughout the year, and it is recommended and it is sunnah that a person tries to fast these days. So as for fasting, a person should try, and that's the end of the chapter. We've concluded the end of أسرار الصيام, and now we move to الكتاب السابع أسرار الحج. But we are going to skip this chapter and revisit it inshallah closer to Hajj. Why? Because it's quite a long chapter, and so it makes more sense to revisit it closer to Hajj rather than now. And we'll move on to the next chapter inshallah, which is to do with other ibadat. So he starts with adabu tilawat al-Quran. But to talk about siyam, so it's virtuous to fast in the virtuous months. It's virtuous to fast in the weeks, the days that are virtuous, i.e. Monday and Thursday, Ashura, and so on and so forth. But a person should also do so with a level of, what's the word? Al-qasd in Arabic. So where a person is doing so in moderation, where a person is not overdoing it and then burning out. So for example, if a person finds it difficult to fast weekly, then at least fast monthly. If a person finds it difficult to fast monthly, then at least fast the virtuous days. And it depends, of course, upon a person's health, upon a person's age, upon a person's circumstance, the work that they're engaged in, the place that they live. But now, generally speaking, in these upcoming months, fasting is going to be easy for most. And so it's an opportunity to fast and to benefit from the reward, inshallah, and also benefit from the consciousness that we acquire through fasting, i.e. the ability to say no to ourselves. And so in these upcoming months, try to fast Monday and Thursday. If not, then at least a Monday or a Thursday. If not, then at least the 3 white days. When I say these upcoming months, i.e. the months of winter, because in the UK, winter Maghrib goes all the way back to close to 4 o'clock. And so really, you wake up, you have breakfast, and you probably won't even be hungry by the time it's time to break your fast. So it's an opportunity, and an opportunity that we shouldn't miss. And for many of us, it's difficult to fast in the long hours of summer, so we should try to utilize the short days of winter. And rather than starting the new chapter today, let me just come to it. Rather than starting a new chapter today, we'll conclude with that, inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. And then we'll talk about something else just for some time, which is the importance of controlling the way that we speak, i.e. controlling the tongue. And it's something which we have spoken about many times, alhamdulillah, in the masjid, but it's something which needs to be revisited as often as possible. Why? To remind ourselves of the importance of good speech. And there are a few ahadith that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in particular that stand out when we talk about the tongue. And Imam al-Nawawi, rahimahullah ta'ala, in his Arba'een al-Nawawiyah, has compiled them within that small text. He's brought these ahadith together. From them, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Min husni islami al-mar'i tarkuhu ma la ya'ni." From the completeness of one's Islam is that he leaves off that which does not concern him. And Ibn Rajab, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions that this is a measuring stick with which we can measure one's ihsan, the state of one's Islam and Iman. You have a person who's praying 5 times a day in the masjid, in the front row. Maybe he's fasting Mondays and Thursdays. Maybe he's praying a bit of qiyam. But he backbites, he slanders, he gossips. This person, he's still at a low level when it comes to his Islam. Why? Because true Islam is what? Taqwa. And taqwa is not measured based upon the amount of salah. Taqwa is measured based upon the abstinence from sin. And that's why Umar ibn al-Khattab, he said, "Your prayer does not fool me, but it's your ability to uphold responsibility that is a true sign of taqwa. Al-amana. And the first thing to be taken away in the end of days will be what? Al-amana. And the last, as-salah. And perhaps we've reached that time today where amana has become something which is rare to find, unfortunately. So the first is من حسن إسلام المرء تركه ما لا يعنيه. So how do I apply that with my tongue? I do not speak about that which does not concern me. If it doesn't concern me, I should have nothing to say about it. For example, how another person runs his home, it's not my concern. How a person dresses, it's not my concern. How a person engages in something which I have nothing to do with, it's not my concern, etc. Family members. This is an area that many people fall into a lot of problems with. Why? Backbiting and gossiping. This person did this, she did this, she said that, he did this, he said that. You're giving up your deeds and you're taking on your back the sins of others. And so if it does not concern me, then I should stay out of it. And if it does concern me, then speaking about it is not what needs to happen. I need to be proactive in addressing the situation. So that's the first. The second, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فليقل خيرا أو ليصمت أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. He said, whoever believes in Allah and the last day, then let him say that which is good or remain quiet. Let him say that which is good or remain quiet. And the question that we have to ask is, what does good actually mean here? When the Prophet ﷺ, he says, فَلْيَقُلْ خَيْرًا أَوْ لَيَصْمُتْ. Let him say that which is good or remain quiet. What does good here mean? Good means that which is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what good means. So it could be a nasiha. It could be bringing some happiness to your brother or sister's heart in a way which is halal. It could be dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and so on and so forth. But if it's not going to be something good, then I should keep my tongue in my mouth and I should not talk. And many of us, we treat our limbs as that which we are going to be held accountable for, but we don't treat our tongues as that which we're going to be accountable for. A person will not steal money from a countertop, but yet he will backbite the owner of the shop. The person won't steal his money, but he will steal from his honor, and he will backbite him. And Ibn Rajab, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions one of the statements of the scholars of Islam, the previous scholars, where he said, if people were to take their tongues into consideration as a limb that they will be held accountable for, just as they take the other limbs into consideration, they would say very little. And the earlier generations of Islam, they were so afraid of their tongues that, as has been mentioned many, many times, they were able to count from one Jum'ah to another the amount of words that they said. Of course, it's not that we can apply that today. I'm not suggesting so, because that would be unrealistic. But at the very least, I ask myself before I speak, is what I'm going to say pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If not, is it displeasing to Allah? If it's not displeasing to Allah, I ask myself, is there any benefit in what I'm going to say? And many relationships, they would be still existent if people would take what you consider their tongues before they speak. How many relationships have broken up because a person does not control their tongue? In fact, people have ended up in prison. People have ended up dead. Why? Because they don't think about that which they say. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhir falyaqul khayran aw layasmut." And the last hadith to take into consideration, although there are many, but three significant hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Subhanallahi wa bihamdihi tamla'ul mizan." أو تملأ ما بين السماوات والأرض أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. سبحان الله وبحمده. The Prophet ﷺ said, fills up one scale just by saying Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, or fills that which is between the heavens and the earth. And so there is a positive way to use the tongue and there is a negative way to use the tongue. The positive way is to be engaged in the dhikr of Allah, to be engaged in reciting the Quran. The negative way is to backbite, to slander, to gossip, to talk about things which are irrelevant and things that I have no control over. And on Yawm al-Qiyamah, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that people will be thrown into the hellfire upon their faces for that which they have said with their tongues. And he also said, a person will utter a word and will not give it much thought. He won't consider it to be anything significant, but it will take him 70 years or days or hours or weeks, Allah knows best. It will take him 70. He'll be traveling the distance, some of the ulama say 70 years, traveling the distance of 70 years through Jahannam until he reaches his place. Why? Because of one word that he uttered. And likewise, a person will say a word and he doesn't give it much thought. He says it and he doesn't really think much about it afterwards. He forgets it. And it will take him into the high parts of paradise. And so our words are significant. La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. It's a word, a statement. But yet with it, a person enters into Islam. And if one were to denounce it with their tongue, they leave Islam. It's just a word. When getting married, a person would say, qabilt. And the other would say, qabilt. I accept. Just a word. But yet with it, the relationship becomes halal. And without it, the relationship becomes haram. If a person were to say, anti taliq, or taliqah, طلقتك, just a word. You're divorced or I divorce you. Just a word. But with it, the relationship ends. Without it, the relationship stays together. And how many people they've said, I divorce you, and they later on regret it. But there's no going back. Why? It's the final divorce. A word. And so we have to be very careful with our tongues. And it's one of the calamities of our day, that people, they use their tongues without any thought or concern. And of course, we add to the tongue, the extension of the tongue, as has been mentioned before, the keyboard, our phones, that which we send, messages, that which we type, etc. We have to be very careful with that which we say with our tongues, that which we say with our thumbs or our fingers, etc. And likewise, it could even be we make signs about someone. Someone walks in and I look at someone and wink at the person because this person has come in, or I make a face about the person. This is backbiting. The Prophet ﷺ, as we know, he walked past two individuals from the companions, and he said they are being punished, but they're not being punished for something which is difficult to abstain from. One would not protect himself from his urine when he was urinating, i.e. would not clean himself properly. The other, he would involve himself in namima, gossip. And for that reason, they were being punished in the grave, which shows that these two things are major sins. And these individuals were companions. So what about us? And so we have to take into consideration our tongues. If a person was able to control their tongue and abstain from bad speech, it's far better for him than praying the nights, but not controlling his tongue. Far better. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned two women were mentioned in his presence. One, she would only pray the salawat al-fara'id, and she would give dried milk as charity, and she would only fast the month of Ramadan. The other, she would fast the days, voluntary days. She would pray the nights. She would give a lot of charity. The Prophet ﷺ said, the one who fasts a lot and gives charity and prays the nights, she's in hellfire. And the one who only prays the fara'id and was only fasting Ramadan and was giving dried milk in charity, he said she's in Jannah. Why? Because the one, even though she had a lot of ibadat, she was voluntarily worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, she used to harm her neighbor with what? With her tongue. For that reason, she would go to the hellfire. The other, she was good to her neighbor and she did not harm her neighbor with her tongue. And so the significance of the tongue should not be downplayed. It is one of the easiest limbs for us to sin with, the tongue, and likewise the eyes. And the eyes are connected to the heart. Whatever enters the heart, the eye enters straight into the heart. And the ears, likewise, but not so much as the eyes. So we'll end with that, inshallah. And next week, we will begin back with the book, Kitabu Adabu Tilawat al-Quran. And then prior to Hajj, maybe by a month, inshallah, we will go back to Asrar al-Hajj, and we'll try to complete the chapter of Hajj prior to the beginning of Hajj, so that those who are going benefit, inshallah. And likewise, those of us who are not going, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to go. We can still benefit by being jealous, number one, and number two, by engaging in the virtuous deeds of worship for those who are not attending Hajj. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad.